meet again at last. The circle is now complete. Now I am the master.
There is no escape. Don't make me destroy you.
You don't know the power of the dark side. You are unwise to lower your defenses.
No escape.
Give yourself to the dark side.
Don't make me destroy you.
So much for the might of chaos.
Side effects may include dry mouth, nausea, vomiting, water retention, painful rectal itch, hallucination, dementia, psychosis, coma, death, and halitosis. Magic is not for everyone. Consult your doctor before use.
By fire be purged! By fire be purged!
My blood cries out for the vengeance of my people's blood, which can only be repaid with at least twice as much blood, or maybe 3 times as much blood. Like if you went to hell, and it was full of blood, and that blood was on fire, and it was raining blood, and maybe that would be enough blood. But probably not.
Oh, yes! Burn them all! Walls of fire! Incinerate! Ha!
Let's destroy it.
Well, hello there. What's up? What is up, guys, and welcome to yet another party night. Oh, wait, not just yet another. The one and only, the final, the last, the remaining Melee Mastery Mechanics Guide. This time featuring the slightly psychotic and highly suicidal, self-exploding and or lightsaber-wielding wizard, Sith Lord slash breaker of chains and probably destroyer of worlds. Or you know, just Sienna for short. Anyways, I hope you guys didn't mind the slightly prolonged intro, but I really wanted to do something special for the final episode in the series. So when I found myself in a creative mood, I thought, hey, why the fuck not? Sienna only has like 6 melee weapons anyways. And just between you and me, there are timed links in the description. Shh, don't tell. Also, dang, you gotta love this scene. But I have to admit, I'll be slightly disappointed if no one in my next quick play team turns into a werewolf. And it's probably gonna be Crowbill. He's got the beard for it. But then again, Witch Hunter Captain has that whole Van Helsing look going for him. But then again, I think we can all agree. We hope it's Bardin. Werepoodle. Anyways, we better get started, cause there's just so much to cover in this video. As always, we're gonna go through each of Sienna's melee weapons one by one, discussing and showcasing their optimal attack sequences in relation to different specific enemy spawns. Siennaception! First up we got the Unflaming Sword. You know, the one-handed sword. Just, you know, the slightly less interesting one without a flaming Wolverine attack. And absolutely no lightsaber sound effects.
But why? 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 Why would you do that?
Now, first things first, Sienna's one-handed sword is identical to Crowbill's one-handed sword in every way, both in terms of the damage modifiers and the attack sequences, not to be confused with Carillion's one-handed sword, which is entirely different. And just like last time, that one-handed sword is a highly versatile weapon with excellent mass modifiers, medium to good mobility, and a healthy mixture of both cleave and armor damage. And the two key metrics to look out for here in terms of the attack sequence is the stagger on the heavy attacks and the armor damage on the third light attack. Also, do you have any idea how many health pots I placed as lighting effects? Me neither. But it's a fucking lot. Some might even say that I placed way too many, cause my game crashed right after I was done recording the one-handed sword, so I had to set it all up again, at which point my game crashed again, after spending another 40 minutes setting it up, at which point my game crashed for the third and final time, at which point I just gave up on setting it up nicely. Now, the one-handed sword has 3 different weapon sequences for dealing with trash minions. The first of which does require stamina, since it's a push block attack into a double light attack. Now, the great thing about this attack sequence is that it utilizes all 3 attacks with the linesman modifier and resets the sequence with a push, which also adds extra control on top of the added damage from your stagger talent. Now, if you're entirely out of stamina, you can instead sequence together a heavy attack with a light attack. Now, if you do have a team surrounding you and there's plenty of control, you can just sequence together your heavy attack sequence. However, this has a very slow wind up and is especially vulnerable before you proc Swift Lanes. For this reason, it's a lot safer to just charge your first heavy attack and follow it up with a quick light attack. Now, last but not least, if you're out of stamina and you have to be highly mobile at any time, you can always just sequence together your first 2 light attacks and do a block cancel. But anyways, let's move on to the armored elites, which is gonna be this corner here, as clearly marked by both Bodvar, his mutant brother, and Scary Spine-Mangler. Oh, for fuck's sake, Gatekeeper, such an attention whore. I didn't even mark you. Now, if you recall, the 3 only attacks with any armor damage are the 2 heavy attacks and the third light attack, which you're going to sequence together as a double heavy into a light attack. And really the most crucial part of this sequence is to always ensure that the third and final light attack, which is an overhead attack, preferably connects as a headshot, since that attack in of its own, even before adding the headshot multiplier, deals more armor damage than both of the heavy attacks combined. If however you have the space to do so safely, the best way to generate temporary HP with the stagger talent is still just gonna be your regular heavy attack sequence, which is also what you're gonna be somewhat using when fighting a mixed pool of enemies, although you can still sequence in a light attack here and there whenever necessary. And last but not least, we have the unarmored elites, against which you're going to be using the almost incomprehensibly complicated sequence of spamming your left mouse button, since this sequence still has the highest single target non-armor damage output, the most significant part of which is still the third overhead light attack. But with that said, let's move on to the Flaming Crowbill, and it's great for a multitude of shady endeavors. Trespassing, breaking an entry, arsenic, burglary, you name it, it's got you covered. And it even glows in the dark, entirely avoiding that awkward conversation of having to tell your partner in crime that you forgot the flashlight mid-robbery. But on a serious note, this weapon probably has one of, if not the, highest armor damage output of any weapon in the game. Now, probably the closest comparison to this weapon, at least in the current patch, comes in the form of Kirillion's one-handed axe. And unfortunately, it has the exact same issue. It has no cleave and it has no stagger, which is definitely and by far the biggest drawback about this weapon. Now, not having any cleave or stagger whatsoever is really dangerous, as we've talked about before. You could almost say it's playing with fire. And unfortunately, there isn't really a solution to be found in the available attack sequences. Really, the best and only thing you can do to mitigate this risk whenever you are fighting a horde is to throw in a push here and there and make sure that you're always mobile, while simply spamming as many light attacks as the horde density allows. Also, you should probably make sure that when you are running this weapon, you paired it up with one of the more AoE heavy staffs, such as the Flamestorm or the Conflack, giving you at least some options for dealing with trash in confined areas. Now, as for armor damage, of which this weapon has plenty, I did some research and some people suggested using a double heavy into a light attack, but this doesn't really seem to make sense in my opinion, since the heavy attacks deal almost identical armor damage compared to the light attacks, with the exception being the fourth light attack, which has the burn but also half the armor damage, and is the light attack that you're going to be sequencing into whenever you do a double heavy first. Now, truth be told, after hitting the same armor dummy for like 30 minutes and realizing that I actually wasn't sure for, which if any of these sequences were the best, but eventually concluded there are 3 different contenders, the first of which is a simple light attack into a block cancel, into a light attack, and so on, allowing for a sequence entirely consisting of overhead attacks with easy headshot access, which is kind of also what the second sequence is trying to utilize, but in this case by doing a heavy attack into a light attack, and then repeating that sequence. But neither of these 2 sequences seem to scale very well under pressure. And since most people are really just gonna spam the light attack sequence anyway, I think the most impactful trick versus armored minions is initiating with 3 light attacks, following that up with a heavy attack and repeating that sequence. Skipping the 4th and less armor damage heavy attack in the sequence, but without ever having to break your chain of attack, which makes it feel a lot more natural and fluent than having to do a block cancel every 2 seconds while fighting a patrol. Now, as for the unarmored elites, the geniuses among you probably realize that you're also going to be using your light attack sequence here, and I know what you might be thinking. Wow, Mr. Party Knife, the amount of useful information in this guide so far is like off the fucking charts, and almost mind-blowing in of itself. But for real though, I honestly feel like the Crowbill needs some sort of a rework, because ever since the nerf, the weapon has just felt super one-dimensional, which is sad, because it's legit one of the most interesting looking weapons in the entire game. And I honestly don't feel like it would be broken if either the heavy 2 attack or the push block attack perhaps just had some amount of cleave. But anyways, let's move on to the OG of unchained weapons. The two-handed mace. And I know some of you might be thinking, wait, Sienna has a mace? And well, yeah, surprise, she does. And not just that, once upon a time, back before the crowbar and the flaming flail, it was even considered the go-to weapon for Unchained. And now you just basically never see anyone use it ever, which is kinda sad if you ask me, since it's probably the most complex of all of Sienna's melee weapons in terms of its attack sequences. Which means 11.5 minutes into the video, I finally have something relevant to talk about. Now, first of all, there are a couple of key things to note here in the armory. The first and perhaps most surprising of which is the fact that it actually has an identical mobility score to a weapon like the one-handed sword, both in terms of effective dodges and the distance modifier. Now, in terms of the weapon's actual attacks, there are 3 key features to take note of. The first of which is the armor damage on the first light attack. The second being that the second light attack doesn't have the tank modifier, unlike the following 3rd and 4th attacks in the sequence. And last but not least, the cleave and stagger modifiers of the 3rd and 4th heavy attack in the sequence. Now, this weapon tends to have a little bit of an awkward start at first versus large numbers of either highly dense or highly scattered trash minions, but it scales really well with attack speed, and has 2 primary sequences for dealing with trash. The first of which consists of a push block attack into a double light attack, utilizing the 3rd and 4th light attack in the sequence, either of which has the tank mass modifier for extra cleave. But due to the relatively slow attack speed for a light attack sequence, in order for the mace to really shine, you should preferably have some sort of attack speed mechanism, which of course scales exponentially with swift slaying, allowing you to extract a disproportionate amount of value for the mace specifically, due to the unusually long initial attack speed of the sequence. Now, as for the second sequence, it has an initiation sequence which can be any attack you want it to be. Most commonly though, it's going to be the push block attack, which is followed by a continuous sequence of heavy attacks, looping together the 2nd and 3rd heavy attack in the sequence indefinitely for the remainder of your ongoing attack chain, which, when broken, requires another initiation in order to return to the sequence. And I think that just about covers dealing with trash minions, so let's move on to the armored elites, against which you're primarily going to be using your first light attack, doing a block cancel and then repeating the sequence, since this attack by far provides the highest amount of armor damage and provides easy overhead headshots. Now, the block cancel is required, since your first light attack is the only attack in the sequence that provides any armor damage, whereas your heavy attack sequence on the other hand has a smaller but still significant amount of armor damage on all attacks, which in combination with good cleave and stagger metrics and the tank mass modifier, which makes it ideal for dealing with highly mixed pools of enemies. Although with anything single target, you're pretty much universally going to be using the light attack animation cancel combo. Which brings me to, and is also an option for, unarmored elites, since this very same attack, which holds the highest armor damage output, also has a significantly higher amount of infantry damage, making it the go-to combo again for single target use. If however you're getting charged by multiple berserkers, you're probably gonna be better off utilizing the heavy attack sequence, using the 2nd and 3rd heavy attack to maximize your chances of staggering the oncoming berserkers, whilst also doubling as the most effective attack sequence for generating temporary HP based on stagger strength. And with that said, you better grab your fidget spinner and start spinning for the winning as we rotate to yet another Sienna melee weapon. The Flaming Flail. is inarguably one of Sienna's best melee weapons, and the only weapon she has with more than 3 effective dodges, and works in a nearly identical fashion to Saltspire's Flail, with the only major difference being an entirely different heavy 1 attack, as well as a slight misalignment in the exact animation time of each attack. But with the one exception of those 2 exceptions, the 2 weapons are completely identical, both in terms of their damage stagger and cleave metrics, and in terms of their attack sequences, with the only difference being the regular Flail having the equivalent of the Flaming Flail's second heavy attack in both of its heavy attack slots. Now, last thing before we move on, I want you to take notice of the listed metrics of the first heavy attack, since the numbers listed in the armory, whilst completely accurate, can at times be super misleading. Now, as you might remember from Carillion's melee mechanics video, most attacks from most weapons are unable to collide with multiple armored minions. The Flail's second heavy attack in this case being the exception and not the rule, and works based on the exact same mechanics and principles that I showcased with the dual swords in Carillion's melee mastery mechanics video, simply removing the in-game collision blocker that activates whenever you hit an armored minion with most weapons, and would have otherwise prevented said attack from cleaving with any further enemies. But that was the second heavy attack, the one with insane cleave, the tank mass modifier, and nothing to prevent it from hitting multiple armored minions. Yet I cleaved maybe 3 storm vermins? Yet the first heavy attack with the listed cleave of 2.12 just ignited roughly 120 storm vermins in a single attack. So how does that make sense? What's the logic, you ask? Well, you'll have to wait for the next weapon to find out. And before you think I'm that much of a dick, it's because editing, okay? Don't ask, cause trust me, you don't even wanna know. Now, as for the Flaming Flail and dealing with infantry trash and hordes, you have 3 different options, all of which should be used depending on your current circumstances. The simplest and most obvious of which is a double light attack sequence into a block cancel, and then repeat. Now, the 2 benefits of this sequence is that it doesn't cost any stamina, and it has the highest infantry damage metrics. However, without any support from your team, at a certain point you are going to get overwhelmed, since on high difficulties this sequence is really only viable at low to medium horde densities, and at a certain point you have to switch to a slightly more input tricky sequence consisting of a double light attack into a push block attack, followed by block cancel to once more reset the sequence. However, even this sequence won't suffice, at least not on Cataclysm and higher difficulties, and at a certain point you're gonna have to sort to your heavy attack sequence, and this is especially useful as an initiation tool for an oncoming horde. Now, the first heavy attack, as previously showcased, doesn't care about the minion density, however it does have a fairly small collision area and is likely to scatter a lot of minions, and preferably you want to do a quick dodge backwards right after the collision, charging up your second heavy attack, which thankfully has a much larger collision area, allowing you to hit the now slightly scattered horde, whilst also having the added benefit of resetting the sequence, allowing your next 2 light attacks to both have cleave, which you can then utilize for high DPS on an already staggered horde. But anyways, I think that just about covers infantry, so let's move on. Now, whenever fighting a controlled amount of armored elites, you want to use your push block attack into a double light attack, utilizing the 3rd and 4th attacks in the sequence, which not only provides the highest amount of armor damage, but has the added bonus of being overhead attacks for easy headshots. But once again, unless you can drop them like flies, at a certain point you are going to get overwhelmed, at which point you have to resort to your heavy attack sequence, as a matter of mere survival. Now, excluding highly mixed enemy pools for a moment, and sticking with heavy armor, like if you just pull the patrol, you want to utilize the fact that both of your heavy attacks has the potential to stagger multiple armored minions. Now, while things are out of control, you're constantly going to be dodging backwards, with the pre-charged heavy attack looking for a window of opportunity, which when found is best utilized by actually moving straight into the horde as you release the attack, in order to hopefully ensure that you do hit any minion that could have already been charging up an attack. Now, as for unarmored elites, your highest damage output is always going to come from your light attack sequence, but more often than not, you are going to be utilizing your heavy attacks, which should preferably always come in pairs or with an added push block attack or block cancel in between, since any follow-up sequence, whether versus armored minions or infantry minions, is always going to be favorable in a double sequence. Last but not least, keep in mind that both the push block attack, the 3rd and 4th light attack, and the 2nd heavy attack can all hit through shielded minions. And up next we got the one and only dagger of swagger, the butcher of bunnies, the knife of life. It is, of course, Sienna's party knife.
Incoming!
Wait, what?
Ew!
Oh fuck. For fuck's sake, it's a corona rat. God damn it, we're fucking screwed.
For this!
No. God damn it! God damn it! God damn it! God damn it! God damn it!
A few moments later.
What the fuck?
12 seconds later.
Go crazy! Go stupid! Go crazy! Yeah! Go crazy! Stupid! Go crazy!
6.5 hours later.
Bruh.
Day 2. Day 3.
This'll be, interesting.
Day 4.
Give yourself to the dark side.
Eventually.
I'm a Brit or a caterpillar. Go banana! Why do people run from me?
3 weeks later.
Wait, where were we again? Oh yeah, Sienna's dagger. Now do notice that the first heavy attack in the sequence has identical metrics to both the first heavy attack in the fire sword sequence, but perhaps more surprisingly, it's pretty much identical to a shield bash. And I mean that in a very literal sense. It's not just that it has identical metrics listed in the armory, not that they provide a very accurate picture in this case anyways, but the actual mechanics behind how the attack propagates through space and calculates things like Cleveland's dagger works based on the exact same formula that is used for all shield bashes, the mechanics of which I'll explain in more detail when we get to the flaming sword. But long story short, it's a shield bash with a flaming dot. Now, one slightly negative aspect of the dagger, which it shares only with Carillions dual-wield daggers, is an effective push-block angle of just 40 degrees. And that's pretty much the only negative thing you can say about this weapon. Okay, to be fair, it doesn't have fantastic armor damage, however, it does have sufficient armor damage, which, at the end of the day, is all you really need. Now, you essentially have two ways of dealing with infantry trash and hordes. The first and super duper obvious one is simply to spam your light attack sequence, which is actually surprisingly effective when you consider the fact that it only has mediocre cleave and stagger modifiers, which it more than makes up for with an absolutely insane attack speed. Now, whenever the horde density gets too high, you're simply gonna spam your heavy 1 attack, do a push block cancel, and repeating that sequence. Another reason this weapon feels so nimble is because it has a 50% stamina cost reduction to all pushes and push block attacks, whilst simultaneously also having a push block attack which increases your overall distance traveled, aka your movement speed. Now, whenever you are trying to burst down a single target armored enemy, you're quite often simply gonna sacrifice your first heavy attack into thin air in order to better time your second heavy attack and hopefully get a headshot. If, however, you're fighting a highly mixed pool of enemies or multiple armored minions, then you're always gonna revert to your first heavy attack, doing a push block cancel and repeating the sequence, which just so happens to also be an insane way of generating temporary HP, assuming you're running the stagger talent, which you should if you're using the dagger. Now, as always, your light attack sequence does provide the most effective infantry damage versus unarmored elites, and preferably you want to initiate with your second heavy attack. However, as soon as you're fighting multiple berserkers, again, you're always gonna revert to your first heavy attack. But anyways, let's move on to the Jedi Lightsaber, also known as the torch. And as you can clearly see from this 100% accurate and entirely unaltered version of the armory, lightsabers are pretty fucking OP. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Saying that lightsabers are OP is a gross fucking understatement. Now, I did forget to meditate this morning, so my force levels aren't so high, which is why my attack speed is a little bit slow at the moment. And oh fuck, I forgot to turn on the show damage mod. But like, I guarantee you that like these guys would be dead now. They're taking thousands of damage right now. Like everything would just be dead. And it stopped being funny like a minute ago. But for real though, just for the lulz, I actually tested it, and there is in fact a sequence that is slightly better than absolutely horrible. And basically you want to do a single light attack into a heavy attack and repeat the sequence. And now you're completely ready to carry it the next time you're playing Blight Reaper. You're fucking welcome. And with that said, let's move on to our final weapon. The Flaming Sword. The real one this time, you know, the one with the flaming Wolverine attack. Now, there are several things that make the Flaming Sword an absolutely amazing weapon. For starters, as I'll showcase and explain in a second, its heavy 1 attack is far better than both the daggers and the flails, since for starters, the burning dot applied has a higher total damage output than any other dot applied by a melee weapon. And it gets even better than that, but first, let me just explain the actual mechanics behind how these infinite cleave attacks function. Now, regardless of whether you're using an actual shield bash, or the dagger heavy one, or the fire swords heavy one, you're actually doing 3 different attacks all at once. The first layer of which really only hits a single minion, to which the strongest dagger will be applied, and the highest initial damage will be taken. which is always going to be the first enemy that your attack collides with. Then you have the second layer, which has infinite cleave, meaning anything within its hitbox is going to be affected, and will do a reduced amount of damage compared to the first minion you hit, and a reduced amount of stagger compared to the first minion you hit, in a cone shape around your crosshair, which will vary in size depending on the weapon you're using. Last but not least, you have the third layer, which also has infinite cleave and will thus also affect anything within its hitbox, but in a much larger cone surrounding the second layer. This third layer, however, will not deal any damage in of itself, meaning there will be no physical damage output related to your weapon's attack damage. But it does, however, apply the exact same dot, and it will try to stagger the enemies that it hit, although for a reduced but by no means insignificant amount. Now, I honestly didn't find it worth it to actually bother going through all of the attack sequences versus specific minions with the flaming sword, since you can pretty much sum it up in a sentence or two. The initial assumption is that you're going to be using your heavy 1 attack into a block cancel for pretty much every conceivable scenario, with two minor exceptions, the most significant of which is whenever you're fighting a single special infantry minion, against which you simply want to use your regular light attack sequence, and the second exception being whenever you're fighting very low amounts of armored minions and nothing else, in which case it's probably going to be quicker to kill them with your third light attack. But other than that, the only really important thing is to practice the block cancel to perfection. I mean, just look at this. You can literally control 20 shielded storm vermins without barely having to even back up. Like, I'm not gonna say it's broken, I'm just gonna claim that it's OP as fuck. Because, well, because it is. So here's the thing, guys, I was initially going to leave you with a pointless explosion for absolutely no reason, but the game just really was not cooperating with my desire for explosions today. And you know, you're only gonna bother with so many crashes before you go, meh. But I'm a creative motherfucker, I don't give up that easily. Storm vermin explosion! Also, we're totally not done yet.
Surprise, motherfucker!
Now, while the minotaurs are raining in the background, I thought you guys should know that we are gonna have a hat trick in this video. Literally, 3 hats, 3 keys, and you know what the funny thing is? The 2 first keys have already been on the screen for like 6-7 seconds each before I even got to the first weapon. Plot twist! That's right, I pulled a ninja edit on you. And just to let you know, I'm really sorry, here's another key. Now, part of me feels a little bit bad about this thing labeled as a guide, turning out to be like a half meme, half guide monstrosity. But I don't know, I got carried away with the intro and then shit just got derailed from there. But I want to thank you guys so much for watching, as this will conclude the Melee Mastery Mechanics series, which in my own personal opinion at least, turned out pretty nice and was an overall success, I'd say. And I really hope you guys enjoyed them, because I put an ungodful amount of hours and work into them. But it's also going to be kind of nice to sort of close down the series, because this way I'm going to have time to finally move on with the Mastery series and do some more class guides, because I know you guys have been asking for that. On top of that, I'm also starting a new guide series next week, and my internet should be fixed soon since Denmark has finally opened up. And like, while I'm rambling on about shit you don't even care about, you're probably wondering what the fuck is going on in the keep. But I ain't gonna tell you, that's a story for another video. But thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. And as always, I love you guys, stay awesome, peace out.
Let's find out where these rat bastards came from. Let's destroy it.
We meet again at last. The circle is now complete. Now I am the master.
There is no escape. Don't make me destroy you.